And so Mac just asked the big question is, are we just recapping or what's the purpose today? So purpose today is to just go over the items that we didn't get a chance to go over. We didn't get a chance to go over last time because we ran out of time, and then anything new and any new updates. So if you look at the document, I believe we left off at, we went over some of the action items, but not all. We kind of skipped around in those. And we left off at MRs with a higher than normal number of threads, I believe. So that being said, does that seem about right to everybody? Okay.
Yeah,
so
I also think I also think we were trying to discover the themes behind it, and documentation was definitely part of the facet here, and the themes. Sorry, I think I cut you off.
No worries. Share my screen too while we're talking. Was that earlier in the document or later, or not in the document at all, Mac? I can't remember.
I think it was last week when we shared the screen, and then we had the list of MRs. Even though the labels, because of the accounting we have, it went into backstage, but the MR title clearly stated it was documentation on the P99s, the high. Yeah,
it's good. I put a comment here. I didn't on that. I think that covers it perhaps, but I didn't make it an action item for anybody. But I'll put a. Does that cover it, you think, Mick?
Yes, sir. Just making it clear for everyone. Thank you.
No, good point. So MRs with a higher than normal number of threads. So late MRs have more than twofold more threads than non-late ones. And I have better data, although I haven't looked at it, that Lily and Kyle were able to put together. So thanks Lily and Kyle. I haven't looked to go about it. I sampled non-late ones rather than having all the data to analyze, but 20 seemed like a nice round number and was statistically significant to say most non-late ones have less than 20 threads, and a large percentage of late ones have more than 20 threads. So that might be a good thing to in the future have a bot detect and comment on. What do folks think?
This is going to be tactical. Kyle, do we know if the triage is serverless, and this is an opportunity for us to dog food serverless too? Can that be time-based? Meaning, like, is there a way to like detect if this MR has been above 30 days? Immediately, there's like a ping on the discussion for people there.
I'd want to confirm with Jinshen. It's essentially just processing a webhook event. So if the data is available through the webhooks, like when it was created, and then we should be able to make that determination. So I'd lean towards yes, but I'll follow up with the team.
Yep. And another thing I think that we could do is set a due date. And if we set due dates, we actually dog food GitLab email notification as well. And I think that also flows nicely in line with the recent handbook update. It's like we set due dates in our MRs, but that may be a bit controversial. But that's really across the board. We could also set it when it's above. If it's above 90 days, sorry, if it's like near the ceiling, near 30 days, only then we set a due date, like another 10 days for an update, and implement with the different layers of levers there as well. What do you all think?
I think it might be a little new. So like to your point where it's controversial, that might be a behavior that we would need to get some broader feedback on. I can say that it's possible through quick actions to do exactly what you just said. So triage, whether it's triage ops or triage serverless should be able to. You can set due date in X or like N days. So the feasibility is there.
Right, and that's why I'm proposing we don't set it like blanket every MR. We only set it when it's like above 30 days, and maybe set another 10 days in the future. Like, hey, please provide updates here if there's none. Have it be actionable.
That might be something for like a second iteration of like a nudging comment. right? So like if we start with MRs after like that are stale after a certain threshold not being actionable, maybe that's where we can try to drive action from a different angle by using due dates. Because at minimum, it might force someone to go in and at least change the due date, or like look at when are we targeting this to be completed.
Yep. I'm curious to hear what Christopher and Wayne thoughts are. We want to incentivize the right behavior.
What I'm trying to wrestle with is there's due dates where like people assign you something and they say this is when it's due by versus the way we have in the handbook, which is you're signing up for this, right? So if we put it in a bot, you're essentially assigning a due date for something. And I guarantee that a lot of people will interpret that immediately as, oh, this is when the time I need to do it by, as opposed to being more efficient and potentially doing it even sooner than that, right? From that perspective, which is if you self-sign up, then maybe you say you can get something done more quickly. So we probably need some clarification around that just to make sure we're approaching it from the right way. There is the concept of SLO or SLA though, which says, this is our expectations for the team. And overall, that would be a reason to use the due date column. If you could somehow indicate, oh, this is the SLO associated with it that we're really trying to achieve. So then people have a much better idea of, hey, if I know I'm not going to be able to hit this SLO, I should be immediately punching this out and basically giving this to another reviewer or maintainer associated with this is kind of the thought process.
Okay, got it. So if
but
that's like
I don't know if I would actually, I might say that's even, well, would I want to implement that now or would I want to, like, I feel like we have so much more basic blocking and tackling that I'm not ready to necessarily go full throttle on this one.
So if that's like too much of a far-reaching iteration, let's step back. And how about in the bot message, we tell the folks to add a due date versus automatically assigning it and link to
it's
the
a good
handbook.
first iteration.
Yeah,
and then let's see whether actually people do that. Like, right?
Yep. And then we track at a high level, like has the number of stale MRs reduced after these reminders are automated and nudging has been rolled out.
I kind of have a similar kind of low form solution, which is we have the Zoom feature now. So like if we get above a certain number of threads, recommending that they do a Zoom session. I don't know if you noticed that. And it's mainly used for incident management, but it could be used here as well, where basically you can add a Zoom link to a channel. There's a little bit of, now that we've changed our policy with passwords, there's a little bit of issue there that we're gonna have to work through, but it's an idea to kind of, similar vein, put the suggestion in to move to a synchronous discussion to just close on a review cycle faster.
Makes sense. So in terms of, it sounds like we do want to do this on threads. We probably want to do the other things that Kyle already has in flight first though.
Yeah, maybe the right way to think about it is get the other things done, but then quickly the fast follow on is suggestions, like a suggestion list based on what the state of it is.
Okay. So next one is training by team and or author. So documentation tagged MRs. That doesn't mean it's from the documentation team. I want to make that clear. Have a median days to merge, double that of other labels. Knowing also, as Nick brought up previously, that the documentation label is not used as accurately as we'd like. Often documentation tags or issues are tagged as backstage, or they get multiple labels, and I think we prefer backstage. If it has backstage and documentation, we call it backstage, perhaps. But that being said, and it was a smaller number, perhaps the documentation team should take the iteration training. And then also point 7 is about 40% of late MRs come from 40 authors at a 94 for that month that had one or more MRs. So that's maybe perhaps focus on those 40 authors as long as they don't feel that it's kind of that they did something wrong. It's not that they did something wrong. It's that and it may be that their MRs were late for all sorts of reasons that iteration training would not have covered it all. But maybe a light recommendation saying, hey, you might be interested in this would be great. What does the team think of these two ideas?
I'm gonna, while Christopher is typing, I'm on board with upgrading documentation to a first-class citizen under throughput types, because right now, documentation and backstage are together, I think we labeled it as backstage, correct, Kyle? Because is that what it is right now?
It's documentation's now I would say a throughput label from respect to danger. So danger won't throw a warning. After that change that I shared with you last week, I can link to it in the doc. But I think we need to make it consistent in the handbook and everywhere else.
Right, exactly. So if in the handbook, documentation is under backstage, we should move it out because that's in line with improving documentation. If there's documentation MR, let's make sure it is credited to as such. And long term, I think we discussed earlier, I think we need to make things more specific. Like maybe backstage should go away, and if it's technical debt, we call it technical debt. If it's refactoring, we call it factoring, but that's a longer running thing. Christopher, you have the next point B if you want to.
By the way, I totally agree, Mac. Backstage is a grab bag, and it's a bad term, and we should get rid of it.
I don't want it to change to technical debt, though.
No, technical debt is specific, so we'll keep technical debt, but backstage should just dissolve.
No, we shouldn't have a type called debt. Like we are 100% prioritized by product. We're supposed to be like debt almost implies that like we have special projects or things of that nature. We don't have that. We have 100%.
We have issues listed with technical debt. Oh, you mean, okay, then it should be a technical debt issue.
If you put type down as technical debt, it's going to immediately get us into a discussion around what is engineering spending its time on. So it's got to be, I'm not sure what the type should be, but it's either be feature or like we got to dig in on what those things are. What people classify typically as technical debt is immediately then associated, well, engineering has a certain percentage of time. There's a whole bunch of unlearning that we have to do there that I don't want to spend time on as an organization. Maybe I should document that in the handbook.
I'd love to hear more about that. From a value stream management perspective, there's quite a lot of talk right now about debt being an important category to track. And if you've got a different opinion, I'd love to hear it.
I think in other organizations, people like to talk in terms of debt, which is customer value add that's not necessarily detectable, right? From that perspective, my view would be is that internal improvements that help the product are value add. So I'd rather have other terms used than debt. Because most organizations, the way they're set up is they have some kind of 80-20 rule or something like that. We don't have that, right? We're supposed to evaluate everything on its merits. So that's what I'm up against, John. But we can maybe talk about it offline a little bit from that perspective.
Okay. So Christopher, just my 2 cents, but you're the boss here for your department. So we do have technical debt. It's labeled like that in the issue tracker, and the product manager prioritizes it in a sprint. That's how I propose we do it.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the feedback. I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of how people are going to view it coming into it who don't understand our process, but that's fair feedback.
What about the idea on focusing on the authors or nudging the authors that have 2 or more MRs that took more than 30 days on taking the iteration training? I could see that really being seen as negatively, like, oh, I did something wrong, or just, as long as it's presented as iterative improvement and just a suggestion, I think it'd be great. Also, 1 month is not a big data set. So maybe we'd want to do it over a longer time period of, maybe 90 days to see, where the top ones are, or not do this at all. What does the group think?
I think we need a couple months of data before I'd be set on this one.
Yes, I agree.
Like the one thing that we've been trying to not avoid, but that we've designed is around team metrics, as opposed to having individual metrics like this. So like this is getting in that category where we're starting to argue individual, though we want people to obviously be in iteration. So in that regard, if we're going to ask ICs to take the training, I would want you don't want to put somebody in a penalty box, take a training. You want them to take the training before they get put in a penalty box. Maybe is the right way to put it.
Yep. So lastly, dealing with email bankruptcy. So, we've talked a lot about bots adding comments. based on various criteria. And I think that's great. But I think as well, many have declared email bankruptcy. They miss those. And or they see them, they may see, bot comments as, as spammy. So one idea, which could just transfer the problem elsewhere, is to use a combination of comments and issues. And, Christopher, as you mentioned, a comment that mentions, hey, maybe you should get on Zoom. Here's a Zoom, which we're using, I guess, on incidents, or Slack messages. But that could easily turn into an annoyance to the people working on the issues, and then also turn into, make Slack get ignored at this, at a similar rate that email may get ignored for some. So it's potentially a controversial thing. What do folks think of number 8 as a potential idea for the future?
I totally agree with your assessment that email comments, all those things, all those automatic spam bots are just a nuisance, and they don't drive institutional change as much as we'd like to. We got to retrain people. That doesn't happen by sending them a message, your merge request is overdue. They get that. How do you help them? I had a 50-minute scheduled iteration office hours this morning, and only 2 people showed up, and only 1 person put an example in there. So no one wants to no one's seeking training, and it's very disappointing. I've tried to keep the tone of those things really light, and I thank people for seeking feedback. But if that's how it's going, it's not going well. So maybe we should take the 10 things that take the longest and discuss those as a company. And it shouldn't be about the person, it should be about the example. But in the end, this has to be a conversation.
It's a good point. Actually, Eric brought that up in a meeting earlier today. It's even though you work really hard and succeed in making it not intimidating, it's still intimidating to bring something to that discussion just because you're the CEO. So
let's use that power for good. Mm-hmm. Let's make sure that if your merge request takes too long, you're going to end up in that call.
That's an interesting idea. What do other people think?
I think we do need to figure out how to generate participation. So I think that's a reasonable idea. I'm just trying to think if there's any other ways I would try to push participation. Originally it was sign up, but I wonder if we should be somehow finding them and just saying, these are the ones that we want to go after. MRs is like most of the ones up to this point have been more around issues than MRs, but I think that's a fair characterization. We could go after MRs in that regard.
Okay. So also, actually, this one wasn't one of my ideas. Many of these on here weren't, but whoever added number 9, do you want to cover it? If you remember, if you added it. Maybe somebody who's not in the meeting. So encourage use of GitLab to-dos to more easily track action items across issues and MRs.
I think this may have been Lindsay, because if you scroll down below, I think she added it's the same language where encourage use of GitLab to-dos to easily track. There you go, 1A. I think it's the same line. It's emails or to-dos. I think it's the same thing with different mechanisms. I think you need to go back to what we discussed earlier. Finding the right trigger for people to break things down.
Okay.
People do look at their MR queue, though, generally speaking, right? I would think that at least, that's a slightly different, the things that are assigned to them. And I wonder if we should separate things that you're working on versus things that you're been assigned to basically review in some fashion.
With the MRs that have timed out, they've fallen through the cracks, do we have analysis that says in whose court they waited was it that the ping pong ball was moving slowly between both participants, or did it tend to time out more with the reviewer or with
It's a
the
combination.
person who posted the code? Do we have any stats on that?
It's a combination. There's some stats earlier on in the doc and in the linked spreadsheet, but the ones that takes a really long time, like more than 60 days, they tend to go idle for more than a month, sometimes more than one time, more than one or more times. For ones that are less than that, one of the most in the 30 days or so, a little over 30 days, it's often in reviewer and maintainer author ping pong, back and forth. And sometimes not quick responses. So those are just two of the top patterns that I noticed from looking through the data. It's a great question. So looking at the clock. So how to measure success? So all these things we're thinking about doing with bots, we are doing with bots, runs the risk of being ignored and at worst annoying the developers. So we should, for each type of bot, discover situation and comment, analyze the success rate. So is that comment working for those? So look at them and seeing if it's working, and if it's not, optimizing it or stop doing it. We should gather feedback from the developers on any new bot behaviors, maybe a public issue when we start doing it, and encourage them to give feedback on how to improve them or if they're helping or not. And also, continue to measure both average days to merge and percentage of merge requests greater than 30 days and seeing if things are improving. So, thoughts on these?
I think 3, having it broadly shown, the metric-wise, will help. I think leading to the success of the MR rate, credit to Christopher and his organization. I think we need to put the metric front and center. I think that seems to be helping with a sense of urgency, and that everybody needs to corral together to get the metric up. I think we'll be wary with the bots because they're already email fatigue, and we'll selectively add additional notifications as we see fit. That's my take on it. I'm happy to hear others.
Makes sense to me.
Keep it simple. That's one, keep it simple to the metrics from that perspective, at least at this point.
So we discussed a couple of the action items last time that people proposed and some we didn't get to. So I'll just copy them over to today's. So Sid, I think we got your point that you're willing to do more iteration training, et cetera. That was your comment from the you were able to add to the last meeting. I think we covered it here as well. Christopher, the Zoom feature available in issues, something to consider there. ETN first iteration of the bot. Kyle, I think that's a question for you.
Yeah, for now we're trying to scope it out. I've signed Jinshin. It's something he's actively working on, but I don't have an ETA from him, so I will get that and report back. And
that's this issue 453.
Yeah. So that issue.
Okay.
And Kyle, let's be iterative. So if we need to cut scope, let's have the discussion.
Okay, we'll do.
And so how should we continue on this path? I didn't copyright, but I'll add that later. The Google Doc is unwieldy and not super efficient, and not as so should we? But a working group is more work than this, and might be overkill for this particular item underneath efficiency overall, where there's, I think, other working groups on that. So happy to keep this in a Google Doc and have us meet periodically, not every week, maybe every other week, or move this to a handbook page and a working group, or what do folks think?
I'd like to keep
group is.
I'd like,
Go ahead, Christopher.
I'd like to keep the cadence up to weekly just because I feel like we need to create some urgency around this from that perspective. I don't have a strong opinion on working group versus keeping working on out of this document for now. Go ahead, Sid.
Yeah, look, the next project I'll work on is trying to set a deadline on working groups and get rid of them at some point. So the whole idea is not to have working groups, not to have more of them. So
Okay.
yeah, let's get some content in the handbook instead of the doc. I think that's the important thing.
And Lily, thank you for the additional columns added, so we've got some things to work from.
Yep. So I will. So fewer working groups. Let's get things into the handbook. And Lily was able to pull additional data, which is great. So we can look at additional trends and validate with more accuracy some of the existing ones. So I'm gonna. I haven't been able to look into that yet, but thanks, Lily, and I will do that. And I'll keep our meeting. I'll make this meeting weekly. Quick, should it go on one of the group calendars? I didn't see an obvious one. So people have to ask to be invited to this currently, how I have that configured. Is there a good group it should go into?
GitLab team meetings. I know a lot of teams use that, even though it could be very specifically focused. So that'd probably be the best option, I would guess. Like the infrastructure team lists theirs in there. So I would, that's effectively what we're doing here. So quick team meeting.
I didn't want to use that for a purpose it wasn't intended for, but I'll add it so others can know about it and join as well. And I'll make it weekly until we don't need it anymore. Anything else?
Let's set a deadline. Like we'll have 2 or 3 more meetings, and then the goal should be to be done with this project.
Yeah, my gut says probably 4.
Cool.
So we have some bot next week, and then probably a couple weeks of looking at it.
To that point, or to similar points, we should be coordinating as asynchronously as possible. So I'll set up a Slack channel as well. Awesome. Anything else we should discuss? Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.